From 30,000 feet above, Adrian Holt could see the dark clouds swirling like an ominous omen, swallowing the last flickers of city lights below. Seattle was now a distant blur, and ahead lay yet another destination, another meeting, another deal that would shift the fate of millions. To most people, air travel was an adventure. To him, it was just another stop in his meticulously planned schedule. A schedule where efficiency ruled and emotions had no place. Beside him, Elena Carter barely spared the window a glance. Instead, her fingers glided swiftly over the tablet screen, double-checking figures, emails, and last-minute updates. 3 years as Adrian's executive assistant had trained her well. She knew his habits, his expectations, and most of all, his intolerance for delays. Without looking up, she spoke. "Mr. Holt, I've rescheduled the board meeting. They'll be expecting us the moment we land." Adrian didn't react immediately. His eyes remained on his phone, his thumb scrolling through numbers that determined the fate of entire corporations. Then, a single nod. Good. No wasted time. Elena smirked slightly, though she knew he wouldn't notice. Adrian Holt was a man who didn't engage in small talk, didn't believe in pleasantries. Every second had a purpose. Every conversation had a point. She respected that. But sometimes, she wondered, was there anything that could disrupt the unshakable fortress he had built around himself? Then, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an incoming storm and unsafe flight conditions, we are making an emergency landing at the nearest available airport. We apologize for the inconvenience." Elena tensed, and for the first time that evening, Adrian finally looked up. He didn't speak, but his expression said enough. He hated this. He hated things that couldn't be controlled, and weather was one of them. The descent was rough, turbulence rattling through the cabin as the aircraft fought against the angry winds. When the wheels finally touched down, the tension in the air didn't fade, it only shifted. The moment they stepped off the plane, the cold wind slammed into them, carrying the thick scent of rain. This wasn't a major city. The runway they had landed on was little more than a forgotten airstrip on the outskirts of a quiet town. No grand terminals, no sleek lounges, just a handful of dimly lit buildings standing against the storm. Raindrops began to fall, soaking into the pavement in dark patches. Elena pulled her coat tighter around herself, scanning the near-empty streets. No towering hotels, no bustling business districts, just flickering neon signs and the hushed whispers of a town that had long since settled in for the night. She turned to Adrian. "Looks like we're not going anywhere until morning." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly over the screen. But within moments, she already knew what he was about to say. No flights, no private jets, no drivers. They were stuck. Their only option was a modest, 2-story inn on the edge of town. Not the 5-star comfort Adrian was used to, but at this moment, luxury wasn't an option. It was survival. The lobby smelled of old wood and fresh coffee. Behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with warm eyes looked up from her newspaper. Adrian approached without hesitation. "Do you have any rooms available?" The woman glanced at the screen, then back at him with a small, knowing smile. "You're in luck. We've got one left." For the first time in a long time, Adrian Holt was at the mercy of something he couldn't control. And somehow, Elena had a feeling this night was only getting started. "I'm sorry, sir, but we only have one room left," the receptionist said, her eyes flickering between the two of them with a hint of hesitation. Elena turned toward Adrian, already knowing what his reaction would be. This was far from ideal, but the alternative, standing outside in the middle of a storm in an unfamiliar town, was even worse. Before Adrian could protest, she spoke firmly. "We'll take it." He shot her a look, but didn't argue. Instead, he simply pulled out his credit card and handed it over, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. The room was modest, one large bed, an old armchair, and a window overlooking the quiet, rain-soaked street. The warm yellow light from the bedside lamp softened the space, casting a glow that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. And that, Elena realized, only made their situation even more apparent. She shrugged off her coat and hung it up before turning to Adrian. "I'll take the chair." He arched an eyebrow. "That's unnecessary." "I'm not sharing a bed with my boss," she said, her voice light but the meaning clear. Adrian studied her for a moment, then, without another word, removed his own coat and draped it over the back of the chair. Do whatever you want. The storm outside showed no signs of easing, so they ordered food from a small restaurant nearby. As they sat across from each other, the simple meal between them, Elena felt a strange sense of displacement. For the first time in years, they weren't in an office. There were no financial reports, no business calls, no pressure of looming deadlines, just the two of them, in a quiet little room where no one knew their names. She leaned back slightly, a playful curiosity slipping into her voice. So, outside of work, do you have any hobbies? Adrian looked up as if the question was foreign to him. Hobbies? You know, things normal people do. Read, watch movies, anything to unwind? He hesitated, then shrugged. I like chess. Elena's eyebrows lifted. Really? I wouldn't have guessed. A rare, almost imperceptible smile flickered across his lips. Chess is about strategy, thinking several moves ahead of your opponent. She tilted her head slightly. Do you see life as a game of chess? For the first time that night, something in his expression shifted. The usual sharpness in his gaze dimmed, replaced by something unwritable. Sometimes. His voice was quiet, but there was weight behind it. And for reasons she couldn't explain, that answer unsettled her. In that moment, she didn't just see the ruthless CEO, she saw a man carrying burdens no one else could see. The atmosphere between them changed, subtle but undeniable. The storm outside raged on, but inside, another kind of storm was brewing. A silent, unspoken tension neither of them acknowledged, yet neither could ignore. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the distance they had always maintained felt impossibly thin. Then, as if caught in the pull of something neither could resist, Adrian leaned in. And when his lips met hers, all the carefully drawn lines between them disappeared. For tonight, all the rules were broken. The morning light crept in through the thin curtains, casting a soft golden hue over the small hotel room. Elena stirred, the warmth of the blanket cocooning her skin, until she shifted and felt the unmistakable emptiness beside her. Her eyes fluttered open. The bed was cold. She turned her head, her heart pounding for reasons she didn't quite understand. The sheets beside her were slightly rumpled, the imprint of where Adrian had been still faintly visible, but the warmth was gone. He was gone. And just like that, reality came crashing back. Nothing, no goodbye, no message, no explanation. He was gone. Elena sat up, the blanket slipping from her shoulders as she stared at the empty space beside her. The cold sheets held no trace of warmth, no sign that Adrian Holt had ever been there. She willed herself to stay calm, to suppress the uneasy feeling creeping into her chest. She should have expected this. Last night had been a moment of weakness, swept up in the chaos of the storm and the emotions neither of them were ready to name. But that was all it had been, a fleeting mistake, a lapse in judgment, especially for Adrian. He wasn't the kind of man who indulged in feelings. He didn't linger. He didn't stay. Elena inhaled sharply, pushing back the irrational ache rising inside her. Shaking off the remnants of sleep, she got out of bed and picked up the clothes scattered carelessly across the floor. Her movements were methodical, each action a silent attempt to regain control over herself. When she finally met her reflection in the mirror, a wry, self-deprecating smile played on her lips. What had she expected? A lingering gaze? A whispered acknowledgement? Breakfast in bed? She scoffed at her own foolishness and shook her head. Adrian Holt wasn't that kind of man, and she wasn't some naive girl clinging to a dream. The business trip ended, and by the next morning, they were back in New York. Not a single word was spoken about what had happened. No subtle glances, no unspoken tension. At least, not on Adrian's part. He carried on as if nothing had changed, operating with the same ruthless precision he always did. Meetings started on time, phone calls were clipped and efficient, and his focus remained unshaken. For him, that night had never happened. And so, Elena tried to do the same. She resumed her work as if nothing had shifted, coordinating his schedule, arranging meetings, reviewing reports. But each time she stepped into his office, each time they stood in the same space, she felt it. Something unspoken, buried beneath the surface. Was it guilt, frustration, or just his deliberate indifference? Whatever it was suffocating. She told herself she didn't care, told herself it didn't matter. But over the next few days she caught herself waiting, for a sign, a flicker of acknowledgement, anything to suggest that night had left even the smallest imprint on him. But Adrian Holt remained Adrian Holt, untouched, unshaken, unmoved. And suddenly, Elena wasn't so sure she understood him at all. A week later, she stepped into his office, a stack of reports in her hands. She had had enough. Adrian stood by the window, his back to her, gazing down at the endless stream of city traffic below. He looked the same, composed, unreadable, an impenetrable force of logic and control. But something felt different. The air between them was heavier, charged with something unspoken. She took a steady breath and placed the reports on his desk. Here's the financial report for last quarter. I've reviewed the investments, and leave it. The words were cold, dismissive. He didn't even turn around. Elena's patience snapped. She could handle silence. She could handle professionalism. But she couldn't handle being erased. Crossing her arms, she leaned against the desk, her voice steady but laced with quiet frustration. If you're going to pretend nothing happened, at least do a better job of it. That made him turn. His sharp blue eyes locked onto hers, unreadable yet intense. But there was something else. Something that flickered for the briefest second before he shut it down. Annoyance. Caution. What are you talking about? His voice was measured, emotionless. Elena let out a dry laugh. Don't do that, Adrian. We both know exactly what I'm talking about. A long silence stretched between them. Neither of them looked away. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, precise, too precise. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. The words landed like a slap. For a brief moment, something tightened in Elena's chest, but she masked it effortlessly. She had expected this. Hadn't she? Elena had anticipated his response. She nodded slowly, a faint, wry smile curving her lips. I see. Adrian didn't look away, but there was something different in his gaze now, something that made her hesitate, even when she had every reason to leave. Taking a deep breath, she spoke bluntly. You know, Adrian, I don't regret that night, but I do regret thinking it meant anything to you. For the briefest second, she saw it, a flicker in his eyes, a crack in the cold exterior. But just as quickly, it vanished. We should get back to work, he said, his voice empty, devoid of anything that could be mistaken for emotion. Elena let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Right, work. She turned, reaching for the door handle, ready to walk away, not just from his office, but from everything. Then his voice stopped her. Elena. She froze. Her heart pounded against her ribs, hope and fear tangling together in the silence that followed. Slowly, she turned back. But when their eyes met, all she saw was a man desperately keeping his distance, burying emotions he refused to acknowledge. He didn't say anything else, and in that moment she understood. Between them, it was over. At least, that's what she believed at the time. 2 months passed. On the surface, Elena's life remained unchanged. She went to work, followed her routine, maintained her composure. But deep inside, she knew something was different. At first, it was just exhaustion. She brushed it off as stress, the result of long hours and sleepless nights. Then came the dizziness, the unexpected nausea, the bitter scent of coffee, once a necessity in her mornings, now made her stomach turn. She ignored it, convinced it was nothing. But as the symptoms worsened, a gnawing unease settled in her chest. And then, one quiet Saturday morning, reality hit. She woke up with a sharp twist in her stomach, an overwhelming wave of nausea washing over her. Gasping, she stumbled into the bathroom, clutching the sink as she stared at her reflection. Her skin was paler than usual, her eyes tired and hollow. And then the thought struck her like a lightning bolt. No, it couldn't be. Her pulse raced. She tried to push the possibility away, but her mind refused to be silenced. Grabbing her coat, she rushed out of her apartment, barely noticing the world around her as she headed for the nearest pharmacy. By the time she returned home, the small white box in her trembling hands felt heavier than anything she had ever held. Locking herself in the bathroom, she tore it open, hands shaking as she followed the instructions. Then came the wait. Seconds dragged into eternity as she sat on the edge of the bathtub, her heart pounding so violently she could feel each beat in her throat. Finally, she looked down. 2 red lines. Her world stopped. She blinked, hoping she had misread it, hoping it would change. But it didn't. The truth stared back at her, undeniable and irreversible. She was pregnant. Elena sat motionless on her bed, the test still clutched in her hands. her mind blank even as a flood of thoughts crashed over her. A baby. Adrian's baby. It had never once crossed her mind that she would become a mother. Not now, not like this, and certainly not with him. Taking a shaky breath, she tried to think. Should she tell him? A part of her said yes, this was his child too. He deserved to know. But then she remembered. She remembered the way he had looked at her after that night. The coldness in his voice when he had dismissed it as a mistake. She could still hear those words echoing in her mind. It didn't mean anything. Would he see this baby the same way? She couldn't bear the thought of hearing him say it again. She wouldn't let this child be treated like an obligation, a burden he never wanted. So she made her decision. By morning she would be gone. That night, Alina barely slept. When dawn broke, she sat at her desk and wrote her resignation letter. The day passed in a blur, handing over her responsibilities, finalizing reports, preparing for the inevitable. By evening, there was only one thing left to do. She stepped into Adrian's office for the last time. As always, he was standing by the window, gazing out at the city below. The sky stretched endlessly before him, painted in hues of orange and blue, but his expression remained unreadable. At the sound of her knock, he turned. His sharp gaze swept over her, cool and impassive. "What is it?" His voice was low, detached. Alina swallowed hard. Steadying herself, she stepped forward and placed the envelope on his desk. "I'm resigning." A heavy silence settled over the office. Adrian's eyes lingered on the resignation letter in front of him, but he didn't reach for it right away. Instead, he looked up, his piercing gaze locking onto Alina. Why? She had prepared for this. "I want a new direction. It's time for a change." Adrian raised an eyebrow, the skepticism evident in his expression. "Alina," he said slowly, as if testing her resolve. "You've worked here for 3 years. You're one of the best assistants I've ever had. And now, all of a sudden, you want to leave. Just like that?" She met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Yes, that's right." A long pause stretched between them. Then, at last, he picked up the letter, glanced through it briefly, and placed it back on the desk. "Do I need to convince you to stay?" Alina shook her head. "No, you don't." Once again, he studied her, really studied her, as if trying to piece together the truth she wasn't saying out loud. For a moment, she thought he might press further, that he might ask the real question lurking beneath the surface. But in the end, he didn't. "Fine." He signed the letter. 2 weeks from now will be your last working day." Alina nodded, turning to leave. She had expected something, perhaps a flicker of surprise or at least a more personal response. But Adrian Holt remained exactly as he had always been, calm, cold, and indifferent. And maybe that was proof she had made the right choice. 2 weeks later, she walked out of the company's doors for the last time. She never looked back. Packing up her life, she moved to a different city, somewhere no one knew her name, where she could start fresh, a place where she could focus on her child, free from the ghosts of her past. She found a new job at a small but respectable financial firm, far less demanding than her previous role. The work was steady, predictable, safe. At first, the transition was difficult. The past still clung to her, the weight of memories refusing to fade. But each time she placed a hand over her growing belly, she reminded herself of what truly mattered. She wasn't alone anymore. From this moment forward, she would do everything in her power to protect this child, even if it meant walking this path alone. 7 months had passed. Alina's life had settled into a rhythm: work, self-care, and preparing for motherhood. She had found stability at her new firm, where she was respected and valued. The pace was slower, the expectations lower, but for once, she didn't mind. She needed peace, and this place gave her that. She spent her free time taking care of herself, exercising, reading, and occasionally indulging in quiet outdoor walks. As the months passed, her baby grew stronger. Each gentle kick inside her filled her heart with a warmth she had never known before. And yet, despite her best efforts to move on, his presence still lingered in the quiet moments. She would see a man with the same sharp posture, the same commanding aura, and for a fleeting second, her heart would stop. She told herself she had made the right decision, that leaving had been necessary, for her child. Adrian Holt didn't care about her. And yet, his memory refused to fade. One crisp morning, Alina arrived at her office as usual, settling into her desk and powering on her computer. But the moment she opened her inbox, her heart stopped. A message from HR. Her company was being acquired. Elena read the announcement once, then again and again. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she scrolled to the bottom of the email, eyes scanning for the name of the acquiring corporation. And when she saw it, her blood ran cold. Holt Enterprises. Her breath caught in her throat. No, it wasn't possible. But there it was, clear as day. After all this time, Adrian Holt was back in her life, and this time, there was nowhere left to run. Elena stared at the screen, her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a routine company update. This changed everything. The acquisition wasn't small. It was a complete takeover. Every department, every position, every employee would now fall under the control of one company. And not just any company. Holt Enterprises. Her stomach twisted. There was no mistaking that name. It was one she had spent the past 7 months trying to forget, yet it remained tethered to her like a shadow that refused to fade. Adrian Holt. Her hands clenched into fists as she tried to steady herself. This couldn't be a coincidence. Was he here because of her? Did he know? No, that was impossible. Even if Adrian had discovered her whereabouts, there was no way he would recognize the truth. And yet, the thought refused to leave her mind. The rest of the day passed in a haze. The numbers on her screen blurred together, and every voice around her became distant noise. One question consumed her. Did he know she was pregnant? And if he did, what would he do? The next morning, the air in the office was thick with tension. Everyone had received the same email, an important company-wide meeting that afternoon, and they all knew who would be standing at the front of the room. Elena had prepared herself for this moment, or at least she thought she had. But when Adrian Holt stepped into the meeting room, her heart stopped. 7 months had passed, yet time hadn't touched him. He was still the same, tall, composed, unreadable. His sharp gaze swept across the room, his presence commanding without effort. But something was different. Or maybe she was the one who had changed. Because this time, the overwhelming fear that had once consumed her wasn't there. He moved with the same authority, the same calculated precision, but when his eyes finally landed on her, it was different. Time slowed. The room faded. And in that frozen moment, Elena saw something she hadn't expected. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't cold. Instead, his gaze held a question, a hesitation, a quiet intensity that made it impossible to look away. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Elena willed herself to remain composed, to maintain the mask she had perfected over these past months. But inside, panic surged like a rising tide. Did he know? Could he see it? Could he sense the secret she carried? When the meeting ended, everyone filed out of the room. Everyone except two, Elena and Adrian. The silence between them was thick, suffocating. She stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs, knowing this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment she saw his name on that email. Then he moved, slowly, deliberately. As if each step toward her carried a weight he wasn't sure he was ready to bear. But his eyes never left her, and when he finally spoke, his voice was different. Not cold, not detached, but cautious, almost unsure. Elena, she swallowed hard. Why are you here? She couldn't answer immediately. Her throat felt tight. Her hands trembled at her sides as she struggled to keep her breathing steady. Finally, she forced herself to speak. I still work here, even after you bought the company. Her voice was quiet, but there was something in it, an exhaustion, a heaviness she couldn't hide. Adrian's jaw tightened. But why? His voice was sharper now, rising slightly as if demanding a truth he couldn't quite grasp. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me know? The words hit like a slap. Elena's breath caught. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet his, and for the first time she let him see it. The emotions she had buried, the pain she had carried, the truth she had tried to keep from him. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She just stared. And in that moment, the weight of everything left unspoken settled between them, because now there was no running, no hiding. And Adrian Holt was finally facing the truth he never saw coming. The storm inside her finally broke free. You never cared about me. Elena's voice was cold, so cold that even she barely recognized it. But beneath that icy exterior, her words cut through her like a blade. You forgot about me the moment that night ended. You walked away like it meant nothing. You left, without a word, without an explanation. Adrian's breath hitched, his body stiffening as her words crashed over him like an unforgiving tide. For a moment the room fell into complete stillness, and then something shifted in his gaze. The sharp confidence, the controlled detachment, it cracked, revealing something hollow, something raw. Pain. Regret. A sorrow so deep, it seemed to swallow him whole. "Elena, you don't understand." His voice was barely above a whisper. She let out a bitter laugh. "Then make me understand." Adrian hesitated. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, something he had never dared to voice before. And then he looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, she saw it. Not coldness, not distance, but fear. A fear he had buried so deep, even he hadn't realized had been controlling him all along. "I've cared about you for a long time," he admitted, his voice unsteady. "But I was afraid of losing you, just like I lost my wife." His words struck her like lightning, leaving her momentarily breathless. His wife? She stared at him, her mind racing, but she wouldn't let herself soften. Because what did it matter now? What did his words mean when he had abandoned her when she needed him most? "So why did you leave me?" Her voice trembled with anger, with hurt, but her resolve remained unshaken. "Why didn't you care about me when I needed you?" Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Adrian exhaled, a weary sound filled with torment. Then he stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, not speaking, just moving, as if each step was an unspoken apology, a silent plea to rewrite the past. His voice, when it finally came, was soft yet with quiet determination. "I was wrong," a confession, a truth he should have spoken long ago. "I can't change the past, Elena, but I can do something about the future." She clenched her fists. She wanted to believe him, but she couldn't. Not anymore. Lifting her chin, she met his gaze, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "I know you don't care about me, Adrian. And that's fine. I don't need you to take responsibility." His expression darkened. "That's not what this is. You don't have any obligation." She cut him off, her voice firm. "I chose this path for myself, and I will continue it, alone." Each word was like a dagger, slicing through her with brutal precision. But she had to say them. She had to be strong, because if she let herself falter now, she might break completely. Turning away, she walked toward the door. Each step, a desperate attempt to outrun the emotions threatening to consume her. She didn't give him a chance to respond. She couldn't, because no matter how sincere he seemed now, no matter how much she wanted to believe him, it was too late. She could never trust him again. And yet, as she placed a protective hand over her growing belly, she knew one thing would always remain true. No matter how hard she tried to erase him, Adrian Holt would always be a part of her. Adrian had made up his mind. He wasn't going to lose her again. Not without a fight. For too long, he had let his fears dictate his actions. He had buried the truth so deeply inside himself that even he had refused to acknowledge it. But if he wanted to protect what mattered, he had to stop running. He had to face the one thing that terrified him the most. When he stood in front of Elena's door, his pulse hammered in his chest. It was absurd. He had spent years mastering control, perfecting the art of unreadable composure. And yet, here he was, hands clenched at his sides, nerves thrumming beneath his skin like an exposed wire. Taking a deep breath, he knocked. A moment later, her voice came from inside. "Come in." The words were cold, emotionless. But beneath them, he sensed something else. Not anger, but a silence so full of pain, it was deafening. Adrian stepped inside, and the moment his eyes met hers, something inside him tightened. She didn't speak. She just stared at him, her gaze distant, unreadable. But he saw it. The walls she had built, the way she was waiting for him to explain, for him to justify, for him to say something that would make everything make sense. He swallowed hard. "Elena, I need to talk to you." His voice was softer than he intended, too raw, too exposed. She didn't reply, but she didn't tell him to leave either. That was enough. "Just a few minutes, that's all I'm asking." Still, she said nothing, but her silence felt like permission. Adrian took a slow breath, steadying himself against the weight pressing on his chest. "I can't live like this anymore." The words came out in a rush, like they had been suffocating him for far too long. "I was wrong. I was wrong from the very beginning. That night, I should never have treated you the way I did, and I regret it. I regret everything." He paused, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "I've cared about you for a long time, Elena. I can't deny that anymore. Something flickered in her expression. Something brief, unreadable. And for the first time, Adrian felt his breath catch, because he had finally said the words he had buried for so long, and there was no taking them back. I know I don't have the right to ask you to forgive me, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. But I can't let things stay like this. I can't keep pretending. He exhaled, as if the very words were tearing him apart. I love you, Elena. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena just stared at him. She had never imagined Adrian Holt, the man who had built walls higher than anyone, would ever say those words. And yet, why did it feel too late? She took a slow, steadying breath. Why now? Her voice was quiet but sharp, laced with a pain she refused to let him ignore. Why wait until everything was already broken? Adrian lowered his head, his shoulders tensing as if the weight of his past had finally caught up to him. Because I was afraid, he admitted. His voice cracked, and for the first time, Elena saw the truth. Not just in his words, but in the way his mask finally shattered. I was afraid to love someone again. Afraid of losing them, afraid of failing them, just like I failed my wife. Elena sucked in a breath. His wife. She had never asked about her, never dared to, and now the truth was spilling out like a wound that had never healed. She was attacked. Adrian's voice dropped to a whisper, his fingers curling into fists. A business rival set a trap for me, but she was the one who paid the price. Before she died, she called me, begged me to come, but I was too late. He inhaled shakily. I couldn't save her, I couldn't protect her, and every single day since then I've lived with that guilt. Elena's chest tightened. She had always seen Adrian as unshakable, a man who nothing could touch. But now she saw the truth. He wasn't untouchable. He was broken, and for the first time, she understood why he had kept his distance. I can't love anyone, Elena. His voice was hoarse. Because I can't lose someone again. I can't go through that pain again. She stared at him, her heart aching in ways she hadn't prepared for. Because this wasn't just a confession, it was a plea. But what was she supposed to do with it? Elena had spent months convincing herself that Adrian Holt was untouchable, that he was cold, detached, incapable of love. But now, as she watched him, his mask completely shattered, she realized the truth. He wasn't invincible. He was a man haunted by wounds that had never healed. His voice was raw, filled with an exhaustion that seemed to weigh down his very soul. I can't love anyone, Elena. His hands curled into fists as if the words physically hurt to say. Because if I do, if I let myself care, they'll be hurt, and I'll lose them. Just like I lost her. Elena felt something deep inside her ache, no matter how much she had resented him, no matter how much pain he had caused her. She understood this fear, the fear of loving someone only to have them ripped away. And yet, that didn't erase what he had done. Adrian exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. His entire body was tense as if he had been carrying this weight alone for far too long. But then you walked into my life, Elena. His voice softened. And for the first time in years, I felt something again. But I was terrified. I was afraid to love you. Afraid you'd get hurt because of me. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding painfully against her ribs. That night, I lost control. Adrian's voice was barely a whisper now, thick with regret. I let myself want you, but the moment morning came, the fear was back. So I ran. I told myself it was the only way to protect you. His jaw clenched, and when he met her gaze, his eyes were filled with something she had never seen before. Desperation. But yesterday, when I saw you again, I realized something. A pause. A deep, shattering pause. Not saying it doesn't protect you. It only hurts you, and I can't forgive myself for that. Elena's breath caught. His words were sincere, but sincerity couldn't erase the past. The pain he had caused was still there. I just want things to go back to normal. Her voice was quiet, yet firm. I just want to live in peace with my child. You don't have to take responsibility. Adrian stiffened. His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something far more painful. Elena, I didn't come here because of responsibility. She sucked in a breath as his voice dropped lower, rough with emotion. I came here because I love you, because I want to take care of you, and because I want to make up for my mistakes. We can start over together. Her chest tightened. She had spent so long imagining this moment, the moment he would finally say the words she had once longed to hear. But now that they were here, She didn't know if she could believe him. She had been burned before, and she wasn't sure she could survive it a second time. You can't expect me to forgive you right away. Her voice wavered slightly. But I can't deny that I feel your words. And maybe I just need time. Adrian nodded as if he had already prepared himself for this response. He had spent too long running from his emotions. Now he was willing to wait. Take all the time you need. His voice was steady. I'll wait, Elena. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I mean this. For the first time, she saw something new in his gaze. Not fear, not hesitation, but determination. A long silence stretched between them before she finally gave a small nod. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't a promise, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. As Adrian left the room, the silence remained. But inside Elena's heart, something had begun to shift. She wasn't ready to let him in again, but maybe, just maybe, she could open the door, just a little. Even now, with Elena beside him, Adrian sometimes felt like he was walking on unfamiliar ground. For years, he had built walls around himself, so thick, so impenetrable, that even he had forgotten how to live without them. And now, as he tried to change, he found himself unsure, hesitant. He wanted to show her how much she meant to him. But how? It wasn't easy for a man who had spent so long burying his emotions. One afternoon, as the rain drummed softly against the windows, Elena sat curled up on the couch, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. She had grown accustomed to solitude, moments of quiet reflection where she let her thoughts drift. Meanwhile, from the kitchen came the occasional clatter of pots and muttered sighs. Adrian was trying to cook. The scent of simmering soup filled the apartment, rich and inviting, but judging by the frustrated sounds coming from him, it wasn't going as smoothly as he had hoped. A small smile tugged at her lips. Rising from the couch, she made her way to the kitchen, leaning against the doorway. Need some help? Adrian turned, his brows furrowed, looking almost guilty, as if he had been caught in the middle of some secret mission. I wanted to make dinner for you. His voice was gruff, uncertain. But I guess I'm not as good as I thought. Elena stepped forward, gently taking the spoon from his hand and stirring the soup. You're doing fine. Her voice was softer than before, warmer. When she looked up at him, Adrian's expression changed. His usual guardedness flickered, replaced by something more vulnerable. Gratitude. Maybe even something more. Of course, not all of Adrian's attempts went smoothly. One evening, after dinner, he stood at the doorway of her room, awkwardly holding something behind his back. A bouquet of roses. Elena blinked, staring at him in surprise. You bought flowers for me? She hadn't expected it. Not from him. Adrian wasn't the type to give gifts or make grand romantic gestures. For years, he had hidden every tender instinct behind an impenetrable layer of control. And yet, here he was. Yes, his voice was still serious, but his eyes held something deeper. I just wanted you to feel special. Elena hesitated, then reached out, her fingers brushing against the petals. The roses were perfect, not extravagant, not overly showy, just simple and sincere. Like him. Thank you. Her voice was quiet, but this time it was filled with something else. Something that wasn't anger. Something that wasn't pain. And Adrian, who had spent so long fearing he would never reach her again, felt a small spark of hope. But it wasn't just flowers. It was the little things. Adrian started doing things he had never done before. Cooking, even when it didn't turn out perfect. Bringing her small gifts, not expensive, but thoughtful. Staying up with her on nights when exhaustion weighed heavy on her. Just sitting beside her, rubbing slow circles on her back until she drifted off to sleep. He went with her to doctor's appointments, helped pick out baby clothes, read books about parenting, even if half the time he acted like he wasn't reading them. And bit by bit, the walls between them started to crumble. Elena still remembered the pain. She hadn't forgotten the months of distance, the ache of being left alone. But now, for the first time, Lucas Holt was showing her, not just telling her, that he cared. Not just with words, but with actions. One morning, as they sat together for breakfast, Adrian suddenly spoke. How do you feel? Elena looked up, a little startled by the question. There was no hesitation in his gaze, only genuine concern. For so long, their conversations had been full of tension, unspoken resentment, and hesitation. But now, this was different. She set her fork down, taking a moment to consider her answer. Then, for the first time in a long while, she smiled. "I feel better." Adrian studied her for a moment, as if trying to decipher whether she truly meant it, and then he said something that made her heart tighten. "I just want you to be happy, Elena." His voice was steady, certain, "and I'll do anything to protect you and our child." She hadn't expected those words to affect her so deeply. For the longest time, she had believed Adrian Holt was incapable of love. But now, as she looked into his eyes, she realized something. He wasn't the same man he had been before, and maybe, just maybe, she wasn't either. For the first time, Elena was no longer standing outside of Adrian's life, watching from a distance. She was part of it now, and no matter how much she tried to guard her heart, no matter how much fear still lingered in the corners of her mind, she couldn't deny it anymore. She loved him. She wasn't ready to say it out loud, wasn't ready to give in completely. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't ready to let him go. The day had finally arrived. The day that both Elena and Adrian had been preparing for. For weeks, she had felt the slow, rhythmic waves of pain, the first signs that her child was coming. But nothing could have prepared her for the cruel twist of fate waiting in the shadows. Adrian stood outside the operating room, gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He tried to steady his breath, tried to stay calm, but the fear clawing at his chest was unbearable. The helplessness, the same crushing helplessness he had felt years ago, was back, consuming him whole. He had lost one person he loved before. Was fate so cruel that it would take Elena from him too? The thought was like a blade to his heart. He had spent so long keeping his distance, afraid to love because he was afraid to lose. And now he realized how foolish that had been, because nothing was more terrifying than the thought of losing her. Inside the operating room, doctors and nurses worked frantically. Elena lay on the table, her face pale, her breath shallow. The pain was unbearable, draining every ounce of strength she had left. She tried to open her eyes, but her vision swam, the world around her blurring. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear muffled voices, urgent orders, machines beeping, and then a sound that sent ice through her veins. The monitor tracking her baby's heartbeat slowed. A wave of fear crashed over her. No, please. She thought of Adrian, of the way he had held her hand at every doctor's visit, of the way he had whispered to her belly when he thought she was asleep, of the love she had seen in his eyes, even when he was too afraid to admit it. She wasn't afraid of dying, but she was terrified that she wouldn't live to see her child grow up. Terrified that Adrian would be left alone again, forced to endure the same pain that had nearly destroyed him once before. Please, let me see him one more time. Outside, Adrian couldn't stop pacing. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if he was carrying the weight of every mistake he had ever made. His vision blurred, his surroundings fading into nothing but the cold, sterile hallway and the closed door that separated him from Elena. He checked his watch, but time had lost all meaning. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes stretched into eternity. Everything around him, the quiet whispers of nurses, the distant hum of the hospital, the dim flickering of overhead lights, disappeared. All he could hear was the pounding of his own heart, and in his mind, the past came rushing back. That night, the night his wife had died, the sound of her voice pleading for him to come, the frantic race against time. The moment he had arrived, too late, the unbearable silence that followed, the realization that he had lost her forever. And now, that same fear was gripping him by the throat. Not again. Not Elena. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the memories, fighting the agony, but nothing could stop it. Nothing could stop the fear that this time, history was repeating itself, and he was powerless to stop it. The past was suffocating him. It had been years, but the memory of that night, the night he had lost his wife, never left him. He had stood outside a different hospital room, his hands clenched into fists, his heart pounding with a fear he had never known before. And then, the news that shattered him. The realization that he had been too late. The unbearable weight of knowing that no matter how powerful he was, no matter how much control he thought he had, he couldn't stop fate from taking her away. He had sworn he would never feel that helpless again. But now, here he was, standing in front of another hospital room, waiting, praying. And this time, it wasn't his wife on the other side of that door. It was Elena, the woman he loved. Adrian's breaths came in short, uneven gasps. The walls around him seemed to close in, every step he took down the hallway feeling heavier, dragging him deeper into a darkness he couldn't escape. He couldn't think. He couldn't breathe. What if he lost her too? The thought alone made his knees nearly buckle. His hand shot out, gripping the armrest of a nearby chair for support. His body trembled, his pulse hammering violently against his ribs. Adrian Holt, a man who never lost control, who never let fear dictate his actions, was unraveling. And for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. There was nothing to do but wait. A cold numbness settled over him. He clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white, but he felt nothing. No pain. Just emptiness. Please, keep her safe. The words escaped him in a whisper, a fragile prayer he never thought he would utter. Please don't take her from me. His throat tightened, his chest ached. I can't lose her. Not again. His voice cracked on the last word, raw with desperation. Adrian Holt had never been a man of faith. He didn't believe in miracles, didn't believe in fate. But right now, he needed to believe in something, because the thought of losing Elena, the thought of losing the mother of his child was a pain he knew he wouldn't survive. He exhaled shakily, closing his eyes, and he waited. Waited for a sign, waited for a miracle, waited for life to return. Then suddenly, the operating room door opened. A doctor stepped out. Adrian's heart stopped. For a second, the world froze. Then he moved, faster than he had ever moved in his life. Doctor, how is she? His voice was hoarse, frantic. Is she okay? The doctor hesitated for just a moment. Then, a sigh, a soft, relieved sigh. She made it through the surgery. Adrian staggered back, his breath catching in his throat. Both mother and baby are stable. The baby is healthy, and she's being monitored post-surgery. We'll keep watching her, but everything looks very good right now. The words barely registered at first. Adrian stood frozen, his mind struggling to catch up. Then, relief crashed into him, so overwhelming that his legs nearly gave out beneath him. A sharp, shaky breath left his lips. Cold sweat rolled down his back. His hands shook as he lifted them, pressing them against his face. His eyes burned, but for the first time in years, they weren't filled with sorrow. They were filled with joy. Thank you. His voice cracked. He didn't care. Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much. The doctor nodded, offering a gentle smile. Congratulations. We'll let you know when she wakes up. Adrian swallowed hard, nodding. And then, for the first time since stepping into this hospital, he allowed himself to breathe again. She was safe. She was alive. And this time, he wouldn't waste another second. Adrian stood outside the recovery room, his entire body tense, his heart hammering in his chest. His eyes never left the door. Each passing second stretched endlessly, time slowing to an unbearable crawl. Then, finally, the door creaked open. A nurse stepped out, offering him a small, knowing smile. She's awake and stable. Relief crashed over him so intensely that he nearly staggered. You can go in and see her. He didn't need to be told twice. Without hesitation, he pushed through the door, his breath caught in his throat as his eyes landed on her. Elena lay on the hospital bed, still weak but no longer deathly pale. Her eyelids fluttered open, her gaze locking onto his. For a split second, Adrian couldn't move, couldn't speak. Because for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he saw something in her eyes that he thought he had lost forever. Tenderness, gratitude, a silent acknowledgement that they had survived. A weak smile played on her lips, and in that moment, something inside him shattered, the last remnants of his fear, his guilt, his hesitation. He moved without thinking, lowering himself into the chair beside her bed and reaching for her hand. His fingers trembled as he gripped hers tightly, his touch both urgent and reverent. I'm here, Elena. His voice was rough, thick with emotion. You don't have to worry anymore. I'm never letting you go again. She didn't pull away, didn't flinch. Instead, her breathing steadied, as if his words had wrapped around her like a shield, soothing the fear she had carried for so long. A moment passed. Then finally she whispered back, I'm not going anywhere. Adrian let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His forehead gently pressed against hers, his eyes slipping shut. They had made it through. And this time, he wasn't letting go. Morning light streamed through the hospital window, casting a soft glow over the quiet room. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was peace. Adrian's heart pounded as he stood near the hospital bed, his gaze locked onto the small bundle in the doctor's hands. His son. The child he never knew existed until the moment he nearly lost both him and Elena. And now, he was here. Real. Alive. A part of Adrian's world in a way that nothing had ever been before. The doctor smiled, holding the baby gently. "Would you like to hold him?" Adrian swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He had faced boardrooms full of ruthless executives, had negotiated billion-dollar deals without so much as blinking. But this was the first time in his life he had ever felt truly terrified. And yet, he nodded. Slowly, carefully, the nurse placed the tiny bundle into his waiting arms. The moment Adrian felt the soft, warm weight against his chest, something inside him shifted. He looked down into wide, innocent eyes. So small, so delicate, so impossibly perfect. A flood of emotions crashed into him. Love, awe, protectiveness, a depth of feeling he had never known before. He tightened his hold just slightly, as if to anchor himself to this moment. As if, for the first time, he had found something that was truly his to protect. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I'm here, little one." His fingers brushed against the baby's tiny hand, and when the infant curled his fingers around Adrian's own, he felt his heart break and mend all at once. "I'll protect you and your mommy forever." From her hospital bed, Elena stirred. The lingering effects of the anesthesia left her sluggish, her body still weak, but she felt it. The warmth in the room. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open, and the first thing she saw was him, holding their son, cradling him like something precious, irreplaceable. Her heart skipped a beat. Adrian had always been composed, distant, guarded. But this was a side of him she had never seen before. A man stripped of his walls, no longer hiding, no longer afraid to feel. A father, loving his child with everything he had. Every movement, every whispered word to their baby made her chest tighten with emotion. Adrian Holt, the man who had spent his life running from love, from attachment, from the fear of loss, had finally stopped running. And as she lay there, watching him hold their child, she realized something. Maybe, just maybe, she had stopped running too. The sight before her stole her breath away. Adrian, holding their son. All the exhaustion, all the worry, it disappeared in that moment. Elena's heart swelled as she gazed at them, her weak smile full of warmth. You're holding him." Her voice was barely a whisper, but the emotion in it was unmistakable. Adrian turned to her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. But for the first time in years, these weren't tears of loss or grief. They were tears of something new, something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Hope. Carefully, gently, he walked toward her and sat beside her bed. With the utmost tenderness, he placed their son into her waiting arms. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper. "This is our son, Elena." A pause. A moment so profound it seemed to stretch into eternity. "Our family." Elena looked down at the tiny life in her arms. And in that instant, she knew. She had everything she had ever needed. She wasn't alone anymore. She had fought. She had struggled. She had endured. And now, she had a family. A child who was living, breathing proof of the love that had survived against all odds. Tears welled in her eyes as she traced her baby's tiny features. "Our baby," she murmured, her voice filled with quiet reverence. She felt the soft rise and fall of his chest, the warmth of his tiny body nestled against hers. Each little breath, each small sound he made, it was a lullaby to her soul. Adrian watched her, completely silent, because for the first time, words weren't necessary. He reached for her hand, gripping it tightly, and in his touch, she felt everything. Every promise, every unspoken apology, every vow he had ever wanted to make. She looked up at him, her gaze locking onto his, and she saw it, the love, the devotion, the absolute, unwavering determination. Adrian Holt would never let her be alone again. His voice was steady when he finally spoke. "I swear to you, Elena," a breath, a pause, a promise. "I will never let you be alone again. I will protect you. I will protect our child, and for the rest of my life, I will love you." Her breath hitched. She didn't need to hear the words to know they were true, because for the first time in a long, long time, she trusted him. "We'll get through it all, Adrian." She reached up, pressing her palm to his. Together. A slow, deep exhale left his lips. Then, gently, he lowered his head, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead before looking down at the small bundle in her arms. He didn't know what the future would hold. But one thing was certain. He would do everything in his power to keep this family safe. Because after all the loss, all the pain, all the years spent running from love, he had finally found home, and he wasn't letting go. Everything she had ever wished for was right in front of her. Elena sat quietly in the living room, watching the golden hues of sunset fade beyond the window. For so long she had lived in fear, fear of opening her heart, fear of trusting again, fear that love was something fleeting, something that could be lost. But not anymore. She had fought, she had struggled, and now she had him. The scent of something delicious filled the air, and her stomach growled in response. A romantic dinner. It was something she had never imagined with Adrian, the man who once lived for nothing but work, whose life revolved around numbers, meetings, and power plays. But now he had changed. Their love had matured, growing through pain, through loss, through every battle they had faced. She wasn't afraid anymore. Curious, Elena stood and made her way to the kitchen. The sight that greeted her made her heart skip a beat. Adrian was setting the dining table, arranging candles and fresh flowers with meticulous care. He hadn't noticed her yet, his brows slightly furrowed, his hands steady, as if every little detail mattered more than anything else. She could feel the love in each movement. "What are you doing?" she asked softly, her voice laced with curiosity. Adrian turned toward her, his expression warm, his lips curving into a rare, tender smile. "Everything is ready." Then he stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "There's just one more thing missing." "And what's that?" she murmured, heart pounding. He reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You." The warmth of his touch spread through her like fire. At that moment, she knew there was nothing that could ever pull her away from him again. All her worries, all the fears from before had vanished. All that remained was love. A little while later, they sat at the table, enjoying the meal Adrian had prepared. Soft candlelight flickered, casting a golden glow over the room. Their baby lay peacefully in the cradle nearby, his tiny breaths filling the space with a quiet comfort. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. Their glances, their smiles, the gentle brush of their hands over the table, it was enough. As the dinner neared its end, Adrian set down his wineglass and exhaled. When he looked at her, something in his gaze had changed. Intensity, a depth she had never seen before. Slowly he pushed back his chair and stood up. Her heart stopped. Before she could react, he took a step toward her, and then in one fluid motion he knelt on one knee. "Elena." Her breath hitched. "You brought light back into my life." His voice was hoarse, filled with raw, unfiltered emotion. "Before I met you, I was tired. I had lost too much. I didn't believe in love anymore." A pause, a slow, shuddering inhale. "But you changed all that." His eyes never wavered from hers. "You showed me that love still exists, that life can be colorful, meaningful, that it's worth fighting for." Her hands trembled as she covered her mouth, emotion rising in her throat. "I can't imagine my life without you." Adrian swallowed, his voice lowering. "So I won't." He reached into his pocket, revealing a small velvet box. When he opened it, the ring inside caught the candlelight, shimmering with quiet elegance. "Elena, will you marry me?" For a long moment she couldn't speak. She just looked at him. At this man she had once sworn to walk away from. At this man who had once feared love, but had now given himself over to it completely. Her chest ached with so many emotions, because these weren't just empty promises. These were the words of a man who had endured pain, loss, and regret, yet had still found his way back to love. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and her lips trembled as she finally spoke. "You've already given me everything I need." A soft, broken laugh escaped her. "And I love you, Adrian. I have for a long time." She reached out, cupping his face between her hands. "Yes, a breath, a heartbeat, a forever. I say yes." Adrian's control finally broke. He stood swiftly, pulling her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. When he pulled back, he pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, lingering as if memorizing the moment. His voice, thick with emotion, was barely above a whisper. "Thank you." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Thank you for trusting me." A pause, then with absolute certainty, "I will never disappoint you." That night wasn't just a romantic dinner. It was a promise, a vow not just made with words, but with actions, with love, with devotion. They were beginning a new journey, not as two people fighting against the past, but as two people ready to build a future together, a family, one that would withstand anything. A few weeks later, they stood together beneath the soft glow of spring sunlight, a small, intimate wedding. No extravagant parties, no flashing cameras, no grand spectacle, just love. A love that had been tested, a love that had survived, a love that had finally found its way home. Their vows weren't perfect, but they were real. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Because forever wasn't built on perfection. It was built on love, trust, and the promise to stand together, no matter what came next. A new chapter had begun. Elena and Adrian's life together wasn't marked by grand gestures or extravagant declarations. It was built on the little things, the quiet moments, the shared glances, the simple joys that made every day extraordinary. After their warm and intimate wedding, they had officially become a family, a small family, but one filled with love, trust, and devotion. Adrian Holt was no longer the man the world once knew, no longer the cold CEO who hid behind numbers and contracts, who let business define his existence. Now he was a husband, a father, and most importantly, a man who had finally learned what truly mattered. Each morning he rose before the sun, quietly slipping out of bed to prepare breakfast, because he knew that in the past, his relentless pursuit of success had stolen so many precious moments he could never get back. But now he had been given a second chance, and he refused to waste it. One morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over the quiet bedroom. Elena stirred, waking in the warmth of Adrian's arms. She didn't move right away. She just lay there, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, feeling the quiet peace that had once seemed so impossible. She reached up, gently brushing her fingers through his hair. There were no words, just this moment. Because after everything, after all the fear, all the loss, all the battles they had fought against themselves and each other, she was finally home. Adrian's eyes slowly fluttered open. When he saw her, a soft smile touched his lips. "Good morning." His voice was low, filled with a quiet happiness. Elena smiled back, her eyes full of love. "Good morning." They didn't say much more. They didn't need to. For a long moment, they just lay there, wrapped in each other's warmth, enjoying the simple, undeniable truth. They had made it. Then, suddenly, a small, joyful sound filled the air. Their son's tiny voice broke the silence, his innocent coos greeting the morning. Adrian chuckled, his entire face lighting up in a way that still took Elena by surprise. "Sounds like someone's awake." He sat up immediately, the eagerness in his eyes making her heart swell. Elena simply nodded, watching as he practically leapt out of bed, already making his way to the nursery. She smiled to herself, knowing just how much he loved their child. When Adrian stepped into the nursery, he saw his son lying in his crib, blinking up at him with wide, curious eyes. And just like that, the rest of the world faded away. All the hardships, all the challenges, all the fears that had once consumed him. None of it mattered anymore. Because this tiny, perfect life in front of him was everything. Adrian leaned down, gently scooping the baby into his arms. "Good morning, little man," he whispered, his voice impossibly soft. His son gurgled happily in response, his tiny fingers reaching up to grasp at Adrian's shirt. And Adrian Holt, a man who once believed he was incapable of love, felt something indescribable swell in his chest. Standing in the doorway, Elena watched them. She saw it all. The way Adrian's hands cradled their child with absolute tenderness. The way his expressions softened into something she had never seen before. Pure, unguarded joy. The way he had transformed before her eyes. And in that moment, she felt something shift inside her. A quiet, profound sense of peace wrapped around her like a blanket. They had come so far. They had survived so much. She took a slow, deep breath before stepping forward. "I can't believe we've been through so much to get here," she murmured, her voice full of quiet wonder. Adrian glanced up at her, his gaze warm, steady. "We made it, Elena." A pause. Then with absolute certainty, "And I'm never going to take this for granted." She smiled, stepping closer, her eyes never leaving his. "You've changed so much, Adrian." Her voice was barely above a whisper, full of emotion. "And I'm so proud of you." Adrian looked down at their son, his heart full to bursting. Then he lifted the baby slightly, making him giggle before turning back to Elena. "I will never be the man I used to be." A pause, a promise, Because you and our son have given me something worth changing for." She reached for his hand, threading their fingers together. Her grip firm. "We'll face everything together." Adrian tightened his hold. Always. For the first time in his life, Adrian wasn't afraid of the future. Because no matter what came next, he wasn't facing it alone. He had Elena. He had their child. And most importantly, he had love. A love that would stand the test of time. A love that would never fade. A love that had turned his world from cold gray to the warmest, most beautiful gold. And he was never letting go. Elena's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she gazed at the man before her. "You've given me everything." The words left her lips in a whisper, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. She still couldn't believe how far they had come. Adrian, once the cold, distant man who locked himself away from love, had transformed into the kind of husband and father she never dared to dream of. And now, she needed nothing more. Nothing else mattered, because this was happiness. A love that had been tested, that had broken and healed, that had become something stronger than she had ever imagined. That day, their little family embraced the simple joys of life. They spent the afternoon in the garden, playing with their son, laughing as they chased after him in the golden sunlight. They spoke of the future, of the life they would build, of the moments yet to come. There would still be challenges ahead, still be unknowns waiting for them. But they weren't afraid anymore, because as long as they had each other, they could face anything. That evening, after their son had drifted into peaceful sleep, Elena and Adrian sat together by the window, fingers intertwined. Above them, the stars stretched endlessly across the sky, silent witnesses to their journey, to the promises they had made, to the love they had fought for. "I love you, Elena." His voice was soft, but in those 4 simple words, she heard everything. The devotion, the gratitude, the absolute certainty that he would never take her for granted again. She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "I love you too, Adrian." And in that moment, they both knew this was just the beginning. A new chapter. A chapter filled with peace, with laughter, with love. A chapter where they were no longer running, no longer afraid, no longer alone. They had found their way back to each other. And this time, they would never let go. Because happiness wasn't a destination. It was the journey they chose to walk together. And as long as they had each other, their love would always endure. Fear and pain can make people push love away. It can make them build walls, close their hearts, and miss out on the most beautiful moments in life. But love is not about perfection. It's about acceptance. It's about choosing to change, to heal, and to fight for what truly matters. Because in the end, love isn't just about finding the right person, it's about becoming the right person for them. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts below. If you believe in the power of love, that it can withstand time, loss, and fear, don't forget to like and share this story. Subscribe channel and help us spread messages of hope, love, and warmth to everyone. Because no matter how difficult life may be, there is always love waiting to find us. And when it does, we must be brave enough to embrace it.